They called him the Immortal because in 27 years of combat across the Roman Empire, no battlefield had claimed his life, no arena had witnessed his defeat, and no enemy had ever seen him retreat even a single step. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. Let me know where you're watching from, and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. Gaius Maximus Victorinus had become more than Rome's greatest gladiator. He had transcended into living mythology, a warrior so dominant that emperors considered his very existence proof of Roman superiority over all other nations. At 42 years old, he owned 3 villas, commanded the respect of senators, had been personally decorated by 4 different emperors, and possessed enough wealth to live like royalty for 10 lifetimes. His name was spoken with reverence from Britannia to Egypt, his victories celebrated in poems and songs, his fighting techniques studied by military commanders throughout the empire. But what none of those admirers knew was that their immortal champion was about to throw away everything he had spent nearly 3 decades building, sacrificing his fortune, his reputation, his freedom, and possibly his life itself, all to defend an 18-year-old slave girl whom Roman society had collectively decided was worth less than the sandals on a patrician's feet. The girl who would destroy Rome's greatest gladiator had been born into slavery and had never known a single day of freedom, kindness, or hope in her entire miserable existence. Nobody bothered to remember her birth name anymore. She was simply called the Worthless One by the various masters who had owned and discarded her over the years. At 18, she was small for her age, malnourished from years of inadequate food, covered in scars from beatings she had endured since childhood, and so thoroughly broken by a lifetime of cruelty that she had learned to make herself invisible, moving through the world like a ghost, that no one acknowledged unless they wanted something to kick her. Worthlessness in Roman eyes stemmed from a combination of factors that made her essentially unsellable in normal slave markets. She was clumsy, dropping things and tripping over her own feet due to poor eyesight that no one had ever bothered to correct. She was weak, unable to lift heavy loads or perform the hard labor expected of healthy slaves. She was slow, taking twice as long as other slaves to complete simple tasks because years of beatings had damaged her hands enough to make fine motor control difficult. And most damning of all, she had a tendency to cry silently while working, tears streaming down her face for no apparent reason, which masters found deeply annoying and took as evidence of mental deficiency. Her current master, a wealthy merchant named Cornelius Brutus, had purchased her 6 months earlier for almost nothing at an auction where she had been part of a lot of defective slaves being sold in bulk to anyone willing to take them off the seller's hands. Cornelius had bought her purely as an act of spite against a business rival who wanted to purchase the entire lot, and he had been regretting the decision ever since. She was assigned to the most degrading work in his household, cleaning chamber pots, scrubbing floors that other slaves had already cleaned just to keep her occupied, and enduring regular beatings that Cornelius administered. Whenever he was in a bad mood and needed something to kick, the morning that would change both their lives forever began, like any other day of misery for the worthless slave girl. She had been beaten the night before for accidentally dropping a pitcher of wine, leaving fresh bruises on top of old ones that never fully healed. She had slept in the cold storage room where broken furniture was kept, huddled against the wall for warmth. She had woken before dawn to begin her endless tasks, moving through the darkness on legs that trembled from exhaustion and malnutrition, tears already flowing down her face because she knew that today would bring the same suffering as yesterday, and tomorrow would bring more of the same until she finally died. Gaius Maximus Victorinus had no intention of visiting Cornelius Brutus that morning. He had been invited to the merchant's villa for a business discussion about investing in a trading venture, a meeting that held no particular importance for a man of his wealth, but which he had agreed to attend out of basic courtesy. When he arrived at the grand villa in his finest robes, Accompanied by servants carrying gifts and documents, he was greeted with the elaborate hospitality that wealthy Romans always showed to celebrities of his status. But while Cornelius was showing Gaius through his home, bragging about his expensive artwork and imported furnishings, and generally trying to impress the legendary Gladiator, they passed through a corridor where the worthless slave girl was scrubbing the floor. She did not look up as they approached, having learned long ago that making eye contact with masters only brought more pain. She simply pressed herself against the wall to let them pass, her eyes fixed on the ground, tears silently streaming down her bruised face, while her damaged hands continued their work. Cornelius barely glanced at her as he walked past. But Gaius stopped completely, his warrior's instincts detecting something that the merchant had completely missed. This was not just another slave performing routine tasks. This was a young woman whose body language spoke of such profound suffering and hopelessness that it hit Gaius like a physical blow to his chest. The way she held herself, the way she flinched without being touched, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear into the wall, all told the story of someone who had been systematically destroyed by cruelty. "Who is this?" Gaius asked, his commanding voice making the girl flinch even more. "Oh, that worthless thing," Cornelius replied dismissively. "I made the mistake of buying her in a bulk lot of defective slaves. She's utterly useless, breaks everything she touches, cries constantly for no reason. I keep her around for the most degrading work because she's not capable of anything else. I've beaten her more times than I can count, but it does no good. Some slaves are just born worthless, I suppose. If you enjoy these Gladiator stories, subscribe to the channel. We share new stories every day. Do you think a person's worth is determined by how society treats them or by something deeper? Tell us what you think in the comments. Something in Cornelius's casual cruelty, in the way he spoke about this broken young woman, as if she were a defective object rather than a human being, triggered a rage in Gaius that he had not felt since his own days as a newly captured slave 27 years ago. He remembered what it felt like to be treated as worthless, to be beaten for entertainment, to believe that suffering was all his life would ever contain. He had survived through strength and fighting skill, but what happened to those who had neither? They became like this girl, crushed under the weight of a system that saw them as less than human. "I'll buy her from you," Gaius said suddenly, the words coming out before he had fully thought through their implications. Cornelius laughed, assuming this was some kind of joke. "Buy her? My dear Gaius, you can have her for free if you want. She's worth nothing, and I'd be glad to be rid of the crying nuisance. Consider her a gift to celebrate our potential business partnership." "No," Gaius replied firmly. "I will buy her properly, at fair market value for a healthy young slave. 10,000 denarii. The sum was absurdly high, more than 20 times what even a skilled slave would cost, and Cornelius stared at him in confusion. "Are you serious? That worthless creature isn't worth 10,000 denarii. She's barely worth the cost of the food she eats, which isn't much because I don't waste good food on defective slaves." Gaius stepped closer to the girl, who was now trembling so violently that she could barely hold the scrub brush. He knelt down slowly so his face was level with hers, and spoke in a voice so gentle that it seemed impossible coming from a man famous for battlefield brutality. "Look at me." When she finally raised her tear-filled eyes to meet his, he saw something that made his heart break. She expected him to hurt her. Every interaction with powerful men in her entire life had ended in pain, so why would this be any different? "What is your name?" he asked softly. The girl opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first, as if she had forgotten how to speak after so many years of being told her words didn't matter. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she managed to say, "They call me worthless, master." "That's not a name," Gaius replied. "That's what cruel people call you, because they cannot see your value. I'm asking for the name your mother gave you when you were born." The girl's eyes widened at the suggestion that she had ever had a mother who loved her enough to give her a name. "Elena, master," she whispered. My mother called me Elena before she died. Elena is a beautiful name, Gaius said. It means light. And despite everything that has been done to you, I can still see light in your eyes. You have survived things that would have broken most people. That is not worthless. That is strength of a kind most warriors never possess. To learn the ending of this story, subscribe and turn on notifications. Tomorrow we have a new Gladiator story. Do you think the strongest people are those who survive the worst suffering with their humanity intact? Leave your answer below. The transaction was completed within the hour, with Cornelius accepting the absurd sum of 10,000 denarii for a slave he considered worthless, certain that the legendary gladiator had lost his mind, but happy to profit from such madness. Gaius arranged for Elena to be immediately removed from the merchant's household and brought to his own villa, where his household staff, though confused by their master's sudden acquisition of such an obviously damaged slave, followed his orders to treat her with gentleness and respect. The first night Elena spent in Gaius's villa was the first night in her 18 years of life that she went to sleep without fresh bruises, without hunger gnawing at her stomach, and without the certainty that tomorrow would bring more suffering. When the household slaves showed her to a real bedroom with a comfortable bed and told her this was where she would sleep, she actually collapsed from shock, unable to process that this much kindness could exist in the world she had always known only as a source of pain. Over the following weeks, Gaius personally oversaw Elena's recovery with the same strategic attention he had once applied to military campaigns. He brought in the empire's finest physicians to treat her injuries and malnutrition, hired teachers to work with her damaged eyesight and improve her coordination, and most importantly, created an environment where she could begin to heal from 18 years of psychological trauma. He never asked her to work, never raised his voice to her, and never allowed anyone in his household to treat her with anything less than complete respect and dignity. The transformation in Elena was slow but remarkable. With proper food and medical care, her body began to heal and gain strength. With patient instruction, her clumsiness decreased as her eyesight improved and her coordination developed. With consistent kindness, her constant crying gradually subsided as she began to believe that not every moment would bring pain. And most remarkably, with someone actually listening to her, she revealed an intelligence and sensitivity that years of cruelty had hidden beneath layers of trauma and survival instincts. But as Elena slowly healed and found safety, Gaius's decision to pay such an extraordinary sum for a worthless slave became the subject of intense gossip throughout Rome's upper classes. Senators who had once respected him now questioned his judgment. Business associates who had sought his partnership now wondered if the legendary gladiator had gone soft or lost his mind. And most dangerously, his actions had insulted and embarrassed Cornelius Brutus, who felt humiliated that Gaius had essentially declared a slave he considered worthless to be worth 10,000 denarii, implying that Cornelius had failed to see value that was obvious to a truly perceptive person. Cornelius began spreading vicious rumors about Gaius throughout Rome's elite social circles, suggesting that the great gladiator's judgment had been compromised by age or injury, that he was wasting his fortune on ridiculous charitable gestures that undermined the proper social order where slaves knew their place. These whispers grew into open criticism, with influential Romans beginning to distance themselves from Gaius to avoid being associated with his supposedly scandalous behavior. This channel is full of gladiator stories. Subscribe so you don't miss any. Do you believe that defending the defenseless is worth any social cost? Write it in the comments. The crisis reached its peak when Cornelius, driven by wounded pride and desire for revenge, brought formal charges before the Senate accusing Gaius of corrupting Roman values by treating a worthless slave as if she had value equal to citizens. Under Roman law, this was not technically a crime, but the Senate had the power to strip Gaius of his honors, confiscate his property, and even exile him from Rome if they decided his actions were sufficiently damaging to social order. A trial was scheduled, and all of Rome waited to see whether their greatest gladiator would be destroyed by his decision to defend a girl that society had decided was worthless. The day of the Senate trial, Helena begged Gaius not to attend, terrified that he would lose everything because of her. "Please, master," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Tell them you were mistaken, that I am worthless like everyone says. Give me back to Cornelius. I cannot bear knowing that you are suffering because you showed me kindness. I'm not worth what you are losing." Gaius knelt before her and took her hands in his, the same hands that had won 1,000 battles. "Helena, listen to me very carefully. You are not worthless. You never were worthless. The people who called you that were wrong, and their wrongness does not become truth just because many people believe it. I would rather lose every honor, every coin, every bit of status I have accumulated in 27 years than live in a world where I see someone suffering and do nothing to stop it. Your worth is not determined by what cruel people say about you. Your worth is inherent, permanent, and nothing can take it away." At the Senate trial, Cornelius presented his case with dramatic flair, painting Gaius as a man whose mind had been damaged by too many blows to the head in the arena, whose judgment had become so corrupted that he could no longer distinguish between a worthless slave and a human being of actual value. Senators nodded along, many of them already predisposed to believe that Gaius had overstepped proper boundaries and needed to be reminded of his place in Roman social hierarchy. Then Gaius stood to defend himself, and the Senate chamber fell silent to hear what Rome's greatest warrior would say in his own defense. His speech became legendary, remembered and quoted for generations after that day. "Honored senators, I stand before you accused of corrupting Roman values because I chose to see worth in someone that society declared worthless. But I ask you to consider what Roman values actually mean. Are we great because we are cruel to the helpless? Are we powerful because we crush those who cannot defend themselves? Are we civilized because we treat people as objects to be discarded when they don't meet our standards of usefulness?" He continued, his voice carrying the same command that had once rallied armies. "I spent 27 years fighting to prove Roman superiority, killing enemies and winning victories that you celebrated as evidence of our greatness. But I learned something during those 27 years that perhaps you have forgotten while living in comfortable villas. True strength is not measured by how many weak people you can destroy, but by how many weak people you can protect. True civilization is not measured by how efficiently you can exploit slaves, but by how much dignity you grant to those who have no power to demand it." Helena was called worthless by men who could not see past her injuries to recognize her humanity. I called her valuable because I looked deeper than her scars and saw someone who had survived 18 years of cruelty without losing her capacity for gentleness. Which of us was correct in our assessment? The men who saw her as an object to be exploited and discarded, or the man who saw her as a human being whose suffering mattered? I submit to you that if Roman greatness requires me to see Helena as worthless, then I would rather be called a fool than participate in such greatness. Our channel has hundreds of gladiator stories. Subscribe to access them all. What do you think was the most powerful moment in Gaius's defense? Write it below. The Senate chamber erupted in chaos, with some senators demanding Gaius be stripped of everything for his insolence, while others found themselves uncomfortably confronted by truths they had spent their lives avoiding. The trial lasted 3 days, with witnesses called from across Rome to testify about Gaius's character, Helena's supposed worthlessness, and whether Roman values were being upheld or destroyed by his actions. In the end, the Senate reached a compromise verdict that satisfied no one, but avoided completely destroying either party. Gaius was allowed to keep Helena and would not be exiled, but he was stripped of all his military honors, banned from ever fighting in the arena again, and fined an enormous sum that consumed most of his fortune. Cornelius was publicly rebuked for bringing frivolous charges motivated by personal spite. But Gaius's reputation was permanently damaged among Rome's elite, with many patrician families refusing to associate with a man who had valued a worthless slave above social status. Gaius accepted the verdict without complaint, knowing he had lost almost everything he had spent nearly 3 decades building. His military honors gone, his fortune mostly gone, his reputation among the powerful destroyed, his invitations to patrician gatherings ended, his business partnerships dissolved, all because he had refused to see a suffering person as worthless when he knew in his heart that no human being could be worthless, no matter what society declared. But something remarkable happened in the years that followed. While Rome's elite shunned Gaius, the common people of the empire embraced him as a hero of a different kind. Stories spread of the legendary Gladiator who had given up everything to defend a worthless slave. And suddenly, thousands of Romans began questioning whether the slaves they owned and the poor people they ignored might also possess value that they had failed to recognize. Gaius's speech in the Senate was copied and shared, read aloud in markets and taverns, inspiring conversations about justice and human dignity that had never occurred before. Helena, given education, medical care, and most importantly, unconditional respect, flourished in ways that proved how wrong everyone who had called her worthless had been. She developed into a skilled physician's assistant, using her natural gentleness and patience to help heal others who suffered. She became a teacher to other former slaves, showing them that their past suffering did not define their future worth. And she became Gaius's most trusted advisor, her insights and intelligence proving invaluable in ways that made his loss of patrician business partnerships seem trivial by comparison. 20 years after the trial, an elderly Gaius sat in his modest home, far smaller than the villas he had once owned, surrounded not by senators and wealthy merchants, but by the dozens of people whose lives had been changed by his example. Helena, now a respected physician in her own right, sat beside the man who had seen worth in her when the entire world had declared her worthless. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him. "Losing everything you had built, all because of me?" Gaius smiled, his weathered face showing the peace of someone who had finally understood what actually mattered. "I spent 27 years building a reputation as Rome's greatest gladiator, accumulating wealth and honors and status that I thought defined my worth. But I was wrong about what worth means. True worth is not measured by what you accumulate, but by what you are willing to sacrifice for those who need you. The day I chose to defend you was the day I finally became the man I had always pretended to be. You were never worthless, Helena. Society was wrong about you. But I was also wrong about what made me valuable, wrong about what I should have been fighting for all those years. You did not cost me everything. You gave me everything that actually mattered. You gave me the chance to be a protector instead of just a killer, a defender instead of just a destroyer. That trade was worth every honor I lost. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and hit the bell. We have new Gladiator stories every day. Subscribe so you don't miss them. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts about whether a person's true worth is revealed not by what they achieve for themselves, but by what they sacrifice for others, just like this legendary gladiator proved when he lost everything defending a slave girl the world called worthless, but whose value he recognized when no one else could.